Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Selvakumar, Assistant Professor in the Department of Epigraphy and Archaeology, Tamil University, Thanjavur. Under the course of Indian culture, we are dealing with the paper Prehistoric and Protohistoric Cultures of India. Under this paper, we will be discussing the module Iron Age Early Historic Transition in South India. So, let's see what is transition. Transition means change from one state to another state. Now, we have to look into the Iron Age Early Historic Cultural as well as historical transition. The period that we are dealing with here relates to prehistoric and protohistoric period. Actually, it is the transition. Just before the beginning of writing, several developments happens all over the world and also in southern India. That's what we will be discussing here. Let's look into the objectives of this module. The objectives of this module is to understand the historical and cultural transition from the Iron Age to the Early Historic. Another objective is to understand the reflection of the transition in material culture. Let's look into the definition of Iron Age. What is Iron Age? Iron Age is defined on the basis of the presence of iron objects in archaeological context. Iron technology was introduced in the Iron Age for making implements. Before the Iron Age, there was no evidence for iron objects and people were mainly using stone implements. The Iron Age succeeded the late Neolithic phase in South India. The Iron Age is tentatively dated between 1300 BCE and 500 BCE in South India. The Iron Age did not have the evidence for writing. That is why we distinguish this particular phase from the Early Historic period. So naturally, we have to understand the transition from the Iron Age to the Early Historic. What are the cultural characteristics of the Iron Age period? Coming to the material cultural traits, we have evidence of megalithic burials, black and red ware pottery, and the introduction of iron technology. And there are several processes associated with the Iron Age. They are development of agriculture and pastoralism, craft specialization, population increase, and increase in warfare and conflicts, and development of long distance trade, and contacts and movement of people and ideas from northern India and beyond, and the development of regional languages. These are the major agencies and processes related to the Iron Age period. So now what you see here is a megalithic burial which is dated to the Iron Age period. This is found in the site of Purundal in Tamil Nadu. Such megalithic burials were built all over South India from the beginning of Iron Age. On the right hand side of the slide, you see the black and red ware pottery. It has red color on the exterior and black color on the interior. Below, you see etched Carnelian beads. Such Carnelian beads were widely used in the megalithic burials. Now, let's look at the Early Historic period. What is the Early Historic period? The Early Historic period in South India is generally placed between 3rd century BCE and 3rd century CE. That is a common era. A few researchers are of the view that the Early Historic period began around 500 BCE. During this period, the Nanda and Maurya dynasties of northern India perhaps had influence over the southern Indian states as well as southern Indian cultural developments. The early dynasties of Cheras, Cholas, Pandyas and the Satavahanas were the political powers of this period, and the use of writing developed in various parts of southern India. The megalithic burial tradition of the Iron Age also continued in the Early Historic period in some regions. These are the main developments in the Early Historic period. In addition to that, we have evidence for long distance trade developing very strongly and coinage was introduced. Political powers became stronger during this period. So, what are the material cultural traits of the early historic period? We have northern black polished ware pottery, a pottery that was produced in northern India, occurring at several archaeological sites in southern India. And then we have rouletted ware, a kind of fine pottery used as a tableware mainly for consuming food, found in all across southern India, many of the archaeological sites. In addition to this, we have evidence for the introduction of brick architecture and roof tiles. In the Iron Age, we don't have any evidence for the use of brick architecture or roof tiles. So the introduction happens during this period. And in addition to that, we also have Andhra ware or Satavahana ware or russet coated painted pottery occurring all across South India in the early historic period. These are the main material cultural traits reflected in the archaeological sites. Coming to the agencies and processes that are responsible for the cultural developments, we have the introduction of the script. The introduction of the script was a major development during this period, and in fact it transformed several aspects of the people's life. And then we have the evidence for the arrival of Jainism and Buddhism in southern India, and also we have evidence for the development of polities. And in addition to that, we have Mauryan expansion happening in southern India. Mauryan rulers, with the intention of controlling southern India, they extended into southern India and occupied probably the northern part of southern India. We have evidence for their inscriptions. And we also have evidence for the rise of urban centers, ports and markets. Overall, we see increased movement of peoples, goods and commodities all across southern India. These are the major processes that we see in the early historic period. What are the material cultural factors of this period? Material culture shows higher diversity during the Iron Age than the Neolithic period. New material cultural traits became popular. We have megalithic burials which are occurring all over. During the Neolithic period, the burials were very limited. There were very few burials found within the residential structures. There was no evidence for the presence of separate burial area. In addition to that, black and red ware pottery, which was very limited in the Neolithic period, became very common during the Iron Age. Thirdly, and most importantly, the iron technology became very strong and it was widely used during the Iron Age. The megalithic burials have lot of iron objects and mostly objects of offense, such as swords, daggers and lot of other varieties of objects. They directly reflect the society was involved in some kind of warfare, which clearly indicates that people were fighting, at least in some context, to control the territories as well as to control the resources. Though iron technology had multiple effects on the society, at one level it must have helped them to clear the forest and to improve the cultivation and agricultural activities. On the other end, it also has supported or in a way aided the conflicts through the making of weapons of offense, which was used to control the territory, which was used as a part of their warfare. Coming to the agencies and processes of this period, we have several processes developing in the Iron Age in southern India. What is a process? Process actually refers to the factors related to historical and cultural dynamics, such as migration of people and ideas and population densities and long distance trade. So development of agriculture and pastoralism was one of the important agencies for cultural developments during the Iron Age. Agriculture was there in the Neolithic period, but that was very limited. During the Iron Age, because of the population increase, naturally they had to bring more areas under cultivation. As a result of that, probably tank irrigation also started. We find many of the megalithic burials of southern India very nearby the tanks, which indirectly suggests the people were creating tanks to collect rainwater, and they were using this for agricultural purposes. So thus the agriculture was intensified during the Iron Age, and iron technology supported this intensification. And pastoralism probably was also growing during the Iron Age. The number of cattle increased, which is again reflected in the conflicts for control of cattle. So frequent fights happened among the tribes to control the cattle, and the enemy cattle were taken away. Probably this was one of the methods adopted by communities to get into agro-pastoralism. Probably some of the hunter-gatherers took away the cattle of the other groups, and thus they were brought into pastoralist way of life. The next important development in the Iron Age was craft specialization. Craft specialization means a specific number of people involving and producing a particular kind of artifact, that means an object. For example, pottery and iron objects. Pottery requires special skills. In the Neolithic period, people were probably producing their own pottery. Probably there was not much of specialization. When in a village, probably one family was looking after pottery production. However, during the Iron Age, we have clear evidence for pottery production by a specific group, which is reflected in the quality of the pottery, which is very high compared to the Neolithic pottery. So potters were probably one group that went into pottery crafts specialization. Then we have iron technology. Iron technology requires much more skill. Probably not everybody could smelt iron and make iron implements. Perhaps because of this, a specific group of people were involved in preparing iron objects, smelting iron and making iron object for day-to-day use. That is how iron smiths or the blacksmiths became separate class of people. Clearly we see these two crafts branching off from the main occupation as separate entity. This in a later period led to the development of caste, and then population increase. If you look at the number of settlements of the Neolithic period and compare with the settlements of the Iron Age period, we see a vast increase in the number. This very clearly proves that there was population increase in southern India during the Iron Age. Obviously, when there was more population, there is more demand for goods, more demand for agricultural produce, more demand for ceramics, more demand for iron objects. So naturally, this also justifies the craft specialization. And the next important agency or process is warfare and conflicts. Here clearly, because of the increase in population, probably there was competition for the resources, especially to control the pastoral lands and other resources. People were, and also cattle, people were fighting or with each other, at least in some contexts. In some contexts, the polity was emerging. In some areas were controlled by small rulers or chiefs, and they had used this iron technology, and also some of the local tribal communities to develop a kind of a warfare. This is very much reflected in the Iron Age material culture. Next is the development of long distance trade. Currently, when we talk of long distance trade, we focus only on the early historic period. However, in the Iron Age, people had involved in long distance trade, especially if we look at the Carnelian beads, which are distributed all over in the megalithic burials. We can certainly say that this would not have been possible without the involvement of long distance trade. In addition to that, we also have copper bronze artifacts and also gold artifacts occurring in the megalithic burials, which clearly reflect that long distance trade to acquire these rare mineral resources was very much active. And the next development is contacts and the movement of people and ideas from northern India and beyond. This is also indirectly evidenced in material culture. Probably people moved from northern India into southern India, at least in some parts. And next is the foundation for the development of regional languages. I feel the development of regional languages in southern India, Telugu or Tamil, Kannada and Malayalam, perhaps developed in the Iron Age period. By the time of early historic period, these languages became more or less distinct. I think the foundation for this development was laid in the Iron Age period, and that was one of the important development. These are the major changes that took place in the Iron Age. As we see, Iron Age is a very formative phase that laid the foundation for the consequent early historic period. Coming to the early historic period, we have a lot of evidence for material cultural change. New material like northern black polished ware, which came from northern India, occurs at several sites. And then fine rouletted ware and the introduction of brick architecture. We have very well planned towns or cities developing in the early historic period. When we look at the Neolithic settlements or even some of the rural settlements of the Iron Age, we have houses of mostly circular or rectangle arranged in a different manner. However, during the early historic period, we have clearly grid pattern settlements developing at many sites. In addition to that, religious architecture in the form of Stupa architecture was also introduced in South India. The towns especially had right streets, and they had parallel settlements and houses in the parallel side, indicating a walkway in between. Probably this kind of pattern was not there in the Neolithic period. We have no idea, as not many sites have been excavated horizontally. But we can see that the planning also changed according to the needs of the society in the early historic period. Because of urbanization, people had a different kind of interactions, mainly commercial interaction, which requires streets to be located in proper right angles so that people could meet face to face each other. This kind of town planning or urban planning develops in the early historic period. Then material culture also changes, like fine pottery, like rouletted ware, northern black polished ware were introduced. These kind of dishes were probably used by the elite section of the society. Several other painted pottery also were introduced. For example, russet coated painted ware, which is found mainly from the early historic period. The next important development was the introduction of the script. People used script for writing their ideas as well as for writing their commercial transactions. We find evidence of writing on pottery and also evidence of writing on the rock shelters as the names of the donors. In southern India, mainly around Madurai, there are several rock shelters with beds donated for the Jain monks or other heretic sects monks. These cave beds have inscriptions in early Tamil Brahmi, which mentions the name of the merchant or name of the person who made the donation, as well as the occupation of the person, or sometimes they are mentioned as traders of gold or other following other occupations. So naturally, people were using script for various purposes during this period. Even at Bhattiprolu, there is an inscription which mentions about Raja Kuberaka. So probably the elites as well as the merchants needed script to record their activities. This was one of the important development. And in the area of religion, Jainism and Buddhism were introduced. The religious way of life probably changed. Before, in the Iron Age, people were worshipping their ancestors, and also they were worshipping the trees and other natural factors. However, during the early historic period, these kind of organized religions were introduced to southern India. This was one of the major development. And the another important development was the development of polities. The political powers became stronger during the early historic period. After the fall of Mauryas, the Shatavakanas emerged in Andhra, Karnataka region, and in the south, we have evidence for this Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas who had an active role in controlling the territories. These kings had controlled many of the urban settlements in these areas. Obviously, these kings had some political interest. That is reflected in this period, a kind of early political entities. We may not call them as a state, some kind of a prelude to early states developed in southern India during this period. The next is the rise of the urban centers, ports and markets. These kind of large settlements in which people of different kinds had gathered emerged all across southern India, and these settlements emerged mainly near the mouth of the rivers, at the sites which later developed into big ports, or the markets where people could meet and trade their goods. These kind of urban centers emerged in the early historic period. So we don't have much evidence for such large urban centers in the Iron Age, but definitely during the early historic period these centers emerged. And in addition, we have evidence for the Indian Ocean trade emerging during this period. Roman contacts was very well developed, and also contacts with the Southeast Asia were also very well developed. Because of these vectors, these towns witnessed people from different parts of the Indian Ocean region. This is also reflected in the material culture in the form of imported ceramics. We have evidence for Roman amphora occurring at several sites in southern India. In addition to that, terra sigillata and several other artifacts reflecting Roman influence are seen in many of the sites of southern India. This clearly suggests that people were increasingly interacting with each other in the early historic period. I hope you understood all the developments that took place from the Iron Age to the early historic in southern India. Now let's look at these slides and see what kind of material culture developed during the Iron Age and early historic period. What you see here in this image is a structure, a brick architecture found at the site of Pattanam in Kerala. This dates to the early historic period. You can see that this particular structure is oriented in right angle, probably adjacent to a street. This kind of brick architecture appeared in the early historic settlements. These kind of sites, we call them as urban centers. Such kind of large brick structures were not present in the rural settlements of the early historic period. Only the urban settlement, so-called urban settlements. When we deal with urban, when we use the term urban, we need to be a bit more careful, because urban in a modern sense is different from urban in ancient sense. When we talk of urban center in the modern period, we imagine tall buildings. But when we deal with the early historic period, we are talking about settlements which are much more organized, which are much more larger in size when compared to the other rural settlements. We have evidence for brick architecture. These are some of the important characteristics of the urban centers. So brick architecture is one of the characteristics of the urban centers of the early historic period. Sometimes these urban centers in terms of size cover more than 1 square kilometer. So in addition to the brick architecture, size of the settlement is also an important factor. In addition to the brick architecture, they also used roof tiles for covering their structure. So clearly we see a change in attitude and perception. Now when we call something as modern, we try to see any kind of RCC built modern concrete structure when compared to thatched roof. Probably this kind of attitude and perception was there in the early historic period. That is why some of the sections of the society preferred such kind of structures which were built made of bricks and roof tiles. Stupa, what you see here is the reconstruction of the Amaravati Stupa. Stupa architecture was introduced to southern India during the early historic period. If we have evidence for stupa all across Andhra Pradesh and also a few in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and this directly reflects the diffusion of Buddhism in different parts of South Asia and beyond. So definitely new religions are coming to this region, and that is one of the important change in the early historic period. Script. We saw earlier the impact of script. What you see here is the inscription from Bhattiprolu casket, which is in early Brahmi, which is a southern variant of a Brahmi, which shows that the script which was introduced during the Ashokan times of prior were modified to suit the local languages. So people were adopting to the script for various languages somewhere in the early historic period, which clearly suggests these languages, regional languages, had emerged very distinctly, at least somewhat, in the early historic period. What you see here is a hero stone found at Puliman Kombai in Tamil Brahmi script in the early historic period. This is dated to 3rd century or 2nd century BC. The dating is done mainly on the basis of paleography. It refers to a person who died after lifting cattle. So interestingly, this particular hero stone has the use of script. What does it indicate? It indicates that people were losing their life while recovering or while taking away the cattle, and those who lost their life were honored by erecting such hero stones. Interestingly, their names were written, the name and to the village to which they belonged. That was written on the hero stones. This indirectly suggests that writing was widespread, at least among the society, at least in some contexts. People were writing their names so that others could see their activities. This is a rouletted ware dish found at the site of Pattanam. This particular pottery is very important. This was produced probably in the Bengal Delta. Recently, based on XRD analysis, it has been suggested this particular pottery was produced in Bengal Delta. One important aspect of this particular pottery is you find this particular potsherd right from Egypt in the west down to Vietnam in the east. This suggests that India was exporting materials right in the early historic period, especially this kind of fine ceramics were exported to all across the Indian Ocean. This particular pottery was earlier thought that it was a Roman pottery, but recently XRD analysis has proved that this pottery was produced in the Bengal Delta. This is one important marker of early historic period. These are the roof tiles. These roof tiles were introduced in the early historic periods. These roof tiles have 3 grooves on the left side and a perforation on the one end. On the rear end, there is one groove. These roof tiles were locked on the roof of the structure. The grooves were meant for the locking and also for draining the rainwater from the roof. Such kind of roof tiles mark the beginning of early historic period. Interestingly, such roof tiles are found all over India, a symbol of urbanization. These roof tiles are also reported in Sri Lanka and also in some of the Southeast Asian sites. Clearly, the idea of making these roof tiles spread to different parts of this region. Glass beads. Glass beads are another important product of the early historic periods. In the Neolithic period, people mainly used stone beads. Stones like cornelian, quartz and other materials were made and they were polished and beads were produced. And during the early historic period, probably there was a demand for beads in such a large scale. People could not find the stones, natural stones for making such beads. Probably because of this, people were fabricating material. That is how they introduced glass industry. Glass was used for making beads extensively. By using glass, they could make beads of various colors and also they could easily make beads of various shapes. Probably this is one of the marker of the early historic period. This shows that people were interested in wearing this kind of beads frequently. That is why these beads were produced in large scale. So in this module, we have seen the characteristics of the Iron Age culture and also the characteristics of the early historic culture and also the mode of transition. Coming to the characteristics of the Iron Age culture, we have iron objects, megalithic burials erected for the dead people, and the introduction of black and red ware pottery and other processes such as craft, specialization, long distance trade, emergence of polity, and also several other developments in the Iron Age period. So in the early historic period, more developments happened, much more evidence for long distance trade, contact with the faraway regions, like contacts within the Indian Ocean region, and the emergence of urban centers, emergence of stronger polities, introduction of bricks, introduction of roof tiles, and introduction of several other materials such as glass beads. So we can see a large number of developments in the early historic periods. In addition to that, coins were also introduced during the early historic period. Earlier, people were mainly using the bartered system. During the early historic period, because of the long distance trade, they had the necessity for the introduction of coins. Coins are actually small metal pieces with symbols marked on them, and probably they had a specific values. These coins were also introduced during the early historic period. So these are the major changes that happened during the early historic period. So we can see that how culture changed from the Iron Age to the early historic period over the span of more than 1000 years.